Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we are at the third day of RHTLaw Asia's Asia Healthcare 2021 Transformation and Possibilities. Thank you for taking time out from your busy schedule to attend this event. Yesterday, the panel discussed the health tech landscape in Asia. Our panelists talk about how the industry can meet the healthcare needs in Asia with the latest technological innovation and how we can ensure that data privacy and protection is being managed effectively and efficiently. Before we begin today's panel, please allow me to point out some housekeeping. Firstly, please note that this event will be recorded. Secondly, please ensure that your microphones are switched off. Thirdly, you may send questions and participate in the conversation via the chat window on your screen. If you wish to remain anonymous, address your questions to the speaker in the Q&A tab on your screen. Fourthly, as you all know, this event is over 4 days. We highly encourage you to join all the sessions until tomorrow, Friday, 30th of April. And lastly, if you encounter any technical issues logging in, and if you're on VPN, please turn it off. If you continue to experience technical difficulty, please email us at techsupport@faberimage.com. Today, our panel will tackle the much talked about healthcare supply chain in the new normal. Let me start by introducing our moderator, Mr. Piyush Gupta, partner at RHTLaw Asia. Piyush has close to 2 decades of extensive experience advising clients on a full range of matters covering aviation, corporate finance, corporate regulatory and competition matters, including cartel enforcement, abuse of dominance, merger control and competition, audit and compliance across Asia. He has extensive experience representing international airlines, MROs, and OEMs on various aspects of aviation law. He has also conducted numerous trainings and workshops on various issues including aircraft leasing and financing, competition compliances, emissions trading and alliances, and regulatory hurdles within the aviation industry. Joining Piyush in the panel are Leonora Lim, Vice President, Life Sciences and Healthcare, Asia Pacific, DHL, Customer Solutions and Innovation. Daniel Leverick, Head of SAP and IT Solutions, Zulik Pharmaceutical. Ng Chi Yong, Director, Commercial Operations, APAC, Leica Biosystems, Danaher. David Mullen, Vice President, Logistics, DCH Auriga. Antonio Bacalandro, President, APAC, Blue Yonder. Piyush, please.
Hi, good morning everyone, and thank you for joining our discussion today on healthcare supply chain during these tumultuous times and how the pandemic has reshaped this industry. Logistics, as we all know, is the backbone of an economy as it ensures free flow of goods and services required for the functioning of the industries as well as the economy. As the COVID-19 pandemic continues to spread, it has exposed weaknesses in supply chains, especially in the healthcare industry. However, desperation breeds innovation, and today we are delighted in welcoming an amazing panel of guests who have been instrumental in overcoming the challenges in the healthcare supply chain industry to ensure the distribution of vaccines ever since they've become available. We will talk to them about the nuances of healthcare supply chain logistics, and as we look back on the past year, it is paramount that we learn from our experiences and share best practices. On this note, I would like to open the floor to our panelists to give you a brief introduction of themselves before we commence the discussion for today. On my left, I have Daniel. Daniel, appreciate if you could introduce yourself, please.
Sure, thanks. My name is Daniel Leverick. I head up SAP and IT Solutions for Zulik Pharma. So in my role, I'm responsible for ensuring that our core SAP ERP system, which is basically the backbone of our IT, keeps running. And I also look after new technology, so things that we're doing in the space of e-commerce, vaccine support, and also around blockchain solutions.
Thanks, Daniel. On Daniel's left is Leonora. Leonora, please.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Leonora. I'm from DHL Customer Solutions and Innovation. We're a cross-business unit organization, and my role is actually to develop the life science and healthcare sector in the region by working closely with our business units and customers to find out what are the new trends, new requirements, look for new solutions, drive business growth, and deliver healthcare.
Perfect. Thanks, Leonora. On her left is Chiyong. Chiyong, please.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Chiyong. I'm the head of operations for Asia Pacific for Leica Biosystems in Danaher. Me and my team, we are responsible for the order fulfillment, inventory management, logistics, and the warehousing functions in Leica. Thanks.
Thanks, Chiyong. And then we have Antonio.
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Piyush. Wonderful to be here. Antonio Bocalando, President of BU under Asia Pacific. Been in Singapore just over 1 year mark. My responsibility is the region, both the growth of the region from the supply chain perspective, but also supporting the operations of our customers in the region.
Thanks, Antonio. And then finally, we have joining us live from Hong Kong, Mr. David Mulan. David, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Hello, everybody. My name is David Moland. I'm the Vice President for Logistics for DCH Auriga. Sorry I can't be there. I'm based in Hong Kong. I'm looking after Greater China and supporting our affiliate companies around Southeast Asia as well on the logistics side. And here in Hong Kong, we are actually distributing all of the vaccines for COVID-19. So I hope that we can share some interesting insights with you today, all about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for introducing yourselves, everyone. We will now delve straight into our first topic of discussion, being COVID vaccine supply chain, challenges, bottlenecks, and opportunities. Now, prior to the pandemic, the healthcare industry focused predominantly on cost control, just-in-time supplies, and standardization. That is, the function was optimized to identify minimum lead times at the lowest possible price. But the just-in-time approach comes with risks, as receiving inventory only when it is needed became extremely challenging as compared to the just-in-case approach, which required stocking up of the inventories ahead of time. In this environment, my first question to the panel is, has the healthcare supply chain industry transited from just-in-time to just-in-case? And if so, how has the experience been? Daniel, let's have your thoughts on this first up, please.
That's a great question. I guess if we are going to look at COVID-19 vaccines as a case, I still think there's not so much visibility as to when stocks will be arriving. You know, we as Zuellig Pharma, we are distributing in a number of markets in Asia, and sometimes at the moment we get maybe a day's notice as to when stocks will be arriving and where they need to be. And so what we're trying to do and what we've tried very hard is really to consolidate a lot of the data points. I think that's what was missing previously, is really being able to consolidate among parties, not just ourselves. There's multiple distributors in the ecosystem, and really being able to give a kind of a holistic view to planners or governments or whoever needs to see that data, so that they can make informed decisions as to where we should be sending stocks at which point in time. I guess what we're trying to do and what we really want to avoid is a case of stock outs and people turning up for vaccinations where there's no stock available. So really, how do we make sure that we give a clear visibility of what's going on across all your inventory, all your stocks, or wherever they're being held, and so that really so that we can make sure that we can vaccinate as many people in the shortest possible time.
Mm-hmm. But then you briefly touched base on the fact that, you know, it's now the decisions are being made at a very short notice. Yeah. Lenora, how does that sort of work out within the logistics or the distribution side of things? I mean, the pharmaceutical companies are putting out the products, but at a very short notice. On the distribution side, what are you guys?
So what I find about the life sciences healthcare industry in general is that they tend to have more conservative supply chains compared to the other sectors. So I find that this industry, they are already in a just-in-case mode, right, rather than just in time. And you know, given the COVID vaccine distribution right now, where you know the demand is very high, it's a lot more of just in time now. Yeah, but actually, if you look at the industry in general, they have typically high inventory stock holding levels. So that's why, I'm saying that it tends to be more of just in case, yeah.
Right, okay. Okay, so then last year, the WHO had reported serious and escalating damage to the global supply of personal protective equipment, sanitizers, testing kits, etc., which was triggered by panic purchasing and hoarding, which in turn was placing lives at risk. We're seeing the same thing being played out in India right now, where there is an absolute and acute shortage of medical oxygen. As a result, black marketeers are profiteering and people are resorting to unjustified hoarding techniques. Before COVID hit, suppliers in the healthcare industry were used to having known predictable demand, and as demand increased considerably, old methods have been rendered ineffective. So my question to you is, how does the healthcare supply chain industry adapt to the emergency situations like panic purchasing, hoarding, etc.? David, let's start with you on this.
Sure. I think in terms of the vaccine, it's harder to hoard it. And based on the account that, the vaccines do require cold chain storage. There's not a lot of 2 to 8 or minus 80 degree cold chain storage locations just sitting there empty, waiting to be used for hoarding vaccines. So I don't believe that there's a huge deal of hoarding of the actual vaccine. But I think there is a little bit more complexity to this. The vaccines generally require 2 doses. So it's important that the health authorities in each country, when they purchase the product, they have to keep half of it for the second dose for the same people who took the first dose. So consequently, in order to make sure that they have enough product for the second dose, they need to actually hoard, if you like, half of it for at least a month, because they have to provide that second dose within 3 to 4 weeks. So it's not necessarily hoarding of the vaccine.
Yeah, but then not just about vaccines. Like I said, other stuff like medical oxygen or PPE kits and stuff, there is evidence to show that people are now hoarding, especially in India. These days, there is a huge amount of panic purchasing and hoarding and extremely short supply. So apart from vaccines, what are your thoughts on the ancillary side of things?
I think, again, when it comes down to logistics side, it's always the storage. You need the storage space to put the oxygen tanks. You need the storage space to put these big, bulky, rather inexpensive PPE items as well. And I think ambient storage space, okay, and that makes it easy. You can store it fairly cheaply, so hoarding is very possible.
Yeah.
But I think for the more fragile products of healthcare, hoarding becomes a lot more expensive, especially if you have to keep it in the proper quality healthcare conditions.
Right.
Yeah, let me step in there, Piyush, because we saw what was really interesting in what's happening in India. We saw during the first months of COVID, some of our customers had 200%, 300%, 400% increase for not just in healthcare and groceries and other places. The truth is, it's if we were to create those redundancies in supply chain, it would be costly prohibitive. But you can have, and I think it goes back to what Daniel was saying, if you have good visibility, understanding of where the inventory is, where the demand is coming from, and that's where we see, answering your question is, we see a lot of the manufacturers and distributors starting to look at the network, right, and saying, okay, do I have the right systems? Do I have enough buffer inventory, like David was saying, and do I have that visibility to be able to make those intelligent choices?
Right.
So that we do see a huge shift, and working with with DHL and with other companies and logistics providers is looking at your network and saying, okay, how do we react quickly with intelligent decisions based on data?
Right. Okay, but also in these uncertain times, we've seen that there have been delays and challenges resulting from factors which are not entirely attributable to the healthcare logistics industry. For instance, if there is a shortage of raw material, if there's a shortage of raw material for a product, the supply chain will inevitably get delayed. Similarly, if there is a technical issue in the software, the entire distribution stream can get affected. Recognizing how interconnected and reliant the logistics industry is with other industries, how have the challenges in another industry, for instance, the software industry, affected the healthcare supply chain? Antonio, let's have you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, one of the things about in today's world is we're so connected, interconnected. So, well, I mean, some of the issues that are affecting India right now is because the U.S. restricted the export of certain raw materials that India needed, specifically in this case right now. You're seeing it not only in healthcare, but you're seeing it in the automotive industry, where the lack of semiconductors is affecting the production of cars, right? So we have grown so lean across inventories and production capacities that raw materials. That's why when you look at, going back to your initial questions, when you look back at your supply chain, it's not just about the finished product. It's about the multi-echelon supply chain, going back to your vendors and starting working with them and looking at those inventories and say, well, how many days of inventory do you have, right? And it's even more complex, because in some cases, one of the things we saw or continue seeing in some countries is you might have the inventory, but you don't have the labor force, because you can't get the labor force to the distribution centers, right? So then you start thinking about automation, right? How can I prevent this in the future? So there is definitely a lot of rethinking across the supply chain, and we haven't even talked on the Suez Canal, right? How that
absolutely, yeah. No, and your point on labor force actually is something that I would want to briefly touch on, which is another critical element of the logistics industry, the manpower. When we saw that when the vaccinations became available, the frontline healthcare personnel were being prioritized. Now, Leonora, did the supply chain industry also lobby towards getting vaccinated first, considering that ensuring an uninterrupted supply chain involved personnel remaining healthy themselves?
Yes, that's a good question. I think for each country will have its own vaccination rules, vaccination prioritization. If you're working in operations, where you have to, deal with the cargo, you have to deal with groups of people, then I think if it's considered essential services, you're at the front line, then, it makes sense to be vaccinated first.
Right.
But of course, if you're, working from home like me, or you're from the office, then, again, depending on the country's prioritization for vaccination, then you can afford to wait. Yeah.
And so, did the industry as such sort of lobby with the government that, okay, you need to get us vaccinated? Because from the government's perspective, it was always just look at the doctors first and then look at the seniors, and then, we never saw the interplay of the vaccines being done to the healthcare logistics industry, because the distribution is important. But did that happen in
like I said, it depends from country to country.
Okay.
Yeah, and I know that at least in Singapore, operations, people working at in Changi Airport area, they would be up in the queue first for the vaccinations.
Right, right. Okay, now let's touch base on some specifics. We know that and David, this was something that you had brought up earlier, so I'll refer to the next question to you. We know that the Pfizer vaccine needs to be stored in a freezer at -94 degrees. And most freezers are not designed for that level of cold. Most are designed for -20 degrees. Taking these factors into consideration, there is extremely limited capacity. Once you take the vaccine out of the cold chain, it has a 5-hour window after which it starts to deteriorate. So the question is, how did the industry usurp the challenges of storage and of getting the vaccines to the smaller towns and cities, or to people who live in remote parts of the world? David.
Yeah, this is actually a very complicated question, because obviously it's different for every country. I'm in Hong Kong. We don't really have anything remote in Hong Kong. Everywhere is very densely populated, so it's a lot easier. So in terms of the initial storage capacity, you're right. Freezers don't normally go down. Normal cold room freezers in logistics operations cannot be set to around -80. You can't do it. So, the best solution, I think the solution that's been used around the world at the moment is ultra-low refrigerators. And there were quite a few on the market at the beginning. Now I think you've probably got a 3 to 6 months lead time to get an ultra-low refrigerator into your location. So that's what we use in Hong Kong. We use ultra-low refrigerators. We have a large refrigerator farm to store the products. Now, once we actually pick the products out of the refrigerators, the key thing here is actually we gotta label every item with the exact time that it was moved out of the refrigerator, so that the healthcare workers who are administering this vaccine, they know exactly how many hours left they've got before it is no good anymore. So we start getting pretty much just-in-time deliveries, and the key thing here to reduce wastage and everything else is on the administrator side, on the government vaccine administration side. They need to be able to issue orders to us for each location based on pretty much the exact number of vaccines they need for that day. And then we can get the product to the customer on time, on that day, and it gets used immediately. Now, the product can be distributed using 2 to 8 degree cold boxes. So you don't need to have a big truck shipping large quantities of product. You can actually ship smaller quantities of products using cold boxes. And the good thing about that, it helps you. If your truck breaks down, you're not going to destroy your product because it's still safe and sound inside that cold box. And it can be moved to another vehicle. At the same time, these cold boxes can also be validated to be opened a few times before the temperature excursion kicks in. So there are strict rules about how long you can open the lid for, etc., and how many times you can open the lid before the temperature in the cold box goes out of spec. So consequently, by doing that, you can actually get the product to more remote locations where they don't have a refrigerator to store it in. And if you can manage the demand properly and understand the exact number of vaccines you need to deliver, then you can use it very quickly and you don't need to store it.
Right. Antonio, Daniel, so David briefly touched base on, new labeling requirements and stuff. From a software and technology perspective, have there been any challenges on that front in terms of changing or revising your software to ensure that, these sort of last-minute changes can be addressed properly?
I think from our side, as we saw a lot of our customers addressing some of these unique challenges, right? Because then this is unprecedented, was the two things that I think maybe have gone unnoticed is the ability to scale up very quickly, right? And this is a whole different conversation, which is the ability to be on cloud, on SaaS, and to have that scale of volumes that really 15, 20 years ago would have been impossible, right? Yeah. Systems would have just crashed, and actually systems were extremely stable. Not only here, but internet, Netflix, everything, right? Yeah. But the second part was that we saw a lot of quick innovation because the systems are much open. In the case of Blue Yonder's ability to have the platform and have people make changes of adding, like David was mentioning, they needed specific information, data to deliver to be able to do that. So we saw a lot of innovation by our customers, a lot of it with our support, in making quick changes to put into production within hours or days. Okay, and that for me is very unique. Many years ago, systems were very close, and you couldn't make that agile transitions, right?
Right.
No, I think maybe to start on to the point, this is maybe a twofold kind of question. I think one of the issues in this region in Asia is that serialization is not mandated yet for pharmaceuticals. So really going down to the vial level is very difficult unless you do redressing, which is what David's talking about in the plant, in a warehouse. What also happens with the COVID vaccines that are taken out of deep storage or deep freeze is that they go from 6 months expiry date to a matter of hours. So each individual vial itself has to be relabeled either manually or through some sort of machinery, which just in this region, as I say, because we don't push serialization, it's not really mandated. So there's a huge overhead, be it a manual process that needs to take place, and then you have to then change your systems to obviously be able to capture this data as well. So it was a bit of a struggle. We found exactly the same issues, and to be able to counter them, being able to change our core SAP system, which isn't sometimes not so flexible to have to make changes on the fly, but then also change the manual process that we have within the warehouse to distribute as well. So it really was a kind of a double whammy, if you like.
Okay, so in terms of scaling up at a very short notice is one thing, but in terms of having the infrastructure to scale up quickly, let's say for instance something as basic and mundane as 5G connectivity or internet and stuff. So if you're and I don't want to name any countries specifically, but for areas which do not have that level of technological or infrastructural sort of base, how have you guys been handling these last minute changes and scale ups?
I can maybe start. We are in Zulu Farmers in 13 countries in Asia. I think in Singapore we're very lucky. David, maybe in Hong Kong is the same. I don't think we have this issue with networks that we're talking about.
Right.
You go to Philippines, Indonesia, then it's once you get out of the city, it's a whole different ballgame. And so one of the things we've been trying to do is look at how we can really capture real-time temperature excursions. And so 5G is very nice in Singapore. We can do that. We can do it, but we can't really replicate that in any other countries.
Right.
So it's very, and when you have very poor network connectivity outside of the cities, it makes life that little bit much harder to implement some of these things which I think we take for granted a little bit in Singapore. So it's a challenge, I'll say.
All right. Then we'll sort of move on to the next issue in terms of the fact that there have been a lot of security issues around the transfer points at each point in the vaccine supply chain. Potential risks include theft, sabotage, and counterfeiting. Additionally, without a proper disposal mechanism, the vaccines may end up in the hands of someone who's going to market them on the black market or try to refill the containers with material that's counterfeit. The question here is, how has the industry addressed concerns about safety and sabotage of vaccines? Leonora.
Yeah, I would take this question in two parts. So, as a logistics provider, when we receive the products, we will do whatever we can to ensure the product integrity and safety, right? So, areas like this would be, I think you have seen from the news, when the vaccines were shipped, when they arrived in the country, it was met with security entourage, right, escorts and all that. So that's the physical aspect that can happen, right? And of course, we have our own security process also. We audit, validate sites, make sure that there are measures in place, right? And we hold certain certifications like TAPA to make sure that, these are some of the security features. Now, the second part would be the product itself, where I think that's where the manufacturers will actually build some of these security features into the products. So like what Daniel mentioned, right, it could be the labels, tamper-proof seals, and even application of technologies like sensors, IoT, right, to help provide visibility and provide alerts, if ever the container was, the product has been exposed or someone is trying to do something funny with it.
But okay, so that's at a level where the vaccines are coming in and you're sort of coming into the country and then you're shipping it off to the hospitals. Now, let's say for instance, in layman terms, I go to a general practitioner to get my vaccination done, and that particular doctor has got 5 vaccinations for the day. So those have already come out of the cold container. But of the 5 that are supposed to be vaccinated, there are 2 no-shows at the last moment. Then, what happens at the end of the day? Do the doctors, is there some sort of a procedure for the doctors? How does the vaccine get sort of disposed of? Again, your thoughts on that. And David, your thought on that as well, please.
It's a difficult question for me to answer. But I know for sure that all these vaccines come with, I'm sure, a long list of instructions, right? It's, and these are all controlled within the clinics, within the dosing sites. They would have to follow protocol. And I'm sure there's a way to audit that. Yeah.
David, probably you have a better experience on that front.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, so I think, one of the key things we've been looking at in Hong Kong has always been the packaging, because if anybody can get hold of the packaging, they could potentially put their own fake vaccines into the original packaging and make it look very good. So, what we do is we actually bring the packaging back. So when we deliver the vaccines to the GPs, to the clinics, we will also go there and we'll pick up the used packaging and bring it back to our warehouse and keep it under lock and key and secure. That product or that packaging is then delivered back to the health authority, and they will make their own arrangements for the proper destruction of it so that they can keep full control of that. In terms of the actual vaccines, any vaccines that are not used, there are opportunities, if it's in a dense country like Hong Kong, to transfer it. Not being used, but it's still good. I can transfer it for them in a cold box to another clinic, and it can be reused. That's okay, as long as it's within the agreed time. And if it has to come back at all because it's damaged or it's expired, etc., then we can bring that back, and again, we put it under lock and key, and then we normally transfer that right back to the original manufacturer, and it's up to them to destroy it.
All right. Okay. Thanks for that. We now move on to the second segment of our discussion, where we will discuss some of the technological developments that have been or are being implemented in the healthcare supply industry. We all know that supply chains are deeply reliant on statistical modeling, which does not generally do well with assessing events such as the pandemic unless specifically modeled for. In light of the same, let us look at what role technology is playing in the healthcare logistics industry. Data supports collaboration amongst stakeholders, resulting in greater supply chain resiliency, and ultimately it can provide the necessary insight needed to make smarter, faster decisions. So here, Daniel, let's start with you. What is unique about the healthcare industry from a technological perspective that you think is different from other industries, for instance, retail or semiconductor?
It's a great question. I feel my background, I've been working in healthcare for 5-6 years. Before that, I worked across all different industries. And what I found when I first joined and started working for Zulig is the healthcare industry seems to be a little bit behind other industries. You look at some of the things that happen, say, in e-commerce, it's light years behind what's going on with the other e-commerce players. And certainly some of the adoptions of the latest tech is something that they may be a little bit more risk averse than retail players. And what we've tried to do is, and this is really specifically to address the issue you mentioned about counterfeits, we've looked to really create or build a kind of a blockchain ecosystem that allows patients to be able to verify a product. And this is something that we did pre-COVID, so we were already thinking about it, looking at, in Asia there's obviously a huge problem around counterfeits and substandard medicines. And so this is something that we wanted to tackle. But it took a long time. We were 2-3 years in the process, just trying to kind of talk to the big pharma players and trying to get them on board and start to use this solution. It's live in one of the key regions that we've actually gone live is Hong Kong, where we saw issues with counterfeit medicines coming in from their various regions. But really to build that, it took a long of time when we can see it's readily adopted in the luxury goods industry or the wine industry. It's already there, and so it's actually, for me, it's a little bit strange as to something that can actually deeply impact and affect your life. It's not, people don't really want to adopt it, and yet something which is a luxury good, a bag or something like that, designer goods, it's there, and you can scan it and you can tell if it's a genuine. And so for me, that was really trying to get the new technology and the cutting edge technology adopted has been sometimes a challenge, I think, really to get people to see the value in it. But I think we're starting to see it, and I think COVID has really accelerated that. We work very closely with Interpol, and we know that there's going to be, once COVID vaccines open up to the private market, there's going to be a flood of counterfeits that hit. At the moment, not so much because governments are controlling it in all the regions, but as soon as that opens up, it's really going to be an issue. So how can we stay kind of one step ahead using technology to help in this kind of this fight has been something we're trying to push. Yeah.
No, and from what I gather, you said that you started doing this even during the pre-COVID times, and you started thinking about these things, and the advancements of technology now has sort of made it relatively easier. So tapping into the Internet of Things connectivity can also allow hospitals to track products and supplies from the point of entry to point of care to create a more connected organization. This requires participation from each provider's supplier and distributor networks. Antonio, the question here is, are there any ongoing or planned technology or software related transformations within the healthcare supply chain industry? And also, do you think, I mean, and Daniel can feel free to step in here as well, do you think there is a role that can be played by emerging trends like artificial intelligence, blockchain, etc., within the healthcare industry?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I think one of the things we need to recognize as we talk about the healthcare industry, let's just be very clear, it is very different in the Americas than it is in Asia than it is in Europe, right? And you know this better than I know, Piyush, but the regulations are different, and the way, I mean, you talk about serialization, not required here necessarily, but it is required in other parts. So it's not something that you can just fix with one, set of guidelines and so forth. But first of all, let me be very, I mean, IoT is going to dramatically impact all supply chains, and certainly in healthcare, because you have that ability to track, and not just track, but you can also track temperature, right, that we've been talking about, right? And if it deviates from certain, levels, you can say that we need to double check that shipment before it actually arrives to the fast. But what the challenge is, what we see with most of our customers is that they're getting, that is just one more piece of data they're getting, right? And they're already inundated with data. And this is where, and you mentioned it right now, which this is where machine learning and artificial intelligence comes in, because how do you make quick decisions when you have 200 or 300% going in? So the two things that we saw during the pandemic in working with our customers and logistics providers was our customers who were already using our artificial intelligence and machine learning language, the reaction time was much quicker, because you started the question with statistical. Well, statistical is looking at the last 3 years. Well, you know what? We didn't have the pandemic in the last 3 years, so the reaction time takes a long time. AI and ML, when you look at the ability to respond and replenish, it was much quicker. The second thing, and this was more our decision with a lot of us, is you have to start prioritizing, right? So you cut down the assortment. You say, okay, these are the 10 or 15 SKUs that I need to focus on. Everything else is secondary, right? Because at the end of the day, even no matter how good your optimization is, you have hard constraints when it comes to transportation, logistics, warehousing, and labor force, right?
Daniel, anything on that?
I think Antonio had some great points. If we look specifically at maybe blockchain piece, it's been a bit of a buzzword, but it's actually become essential, I think, going forward. There was always, I think, in healthcare, maybe not in healthcare in general, but there's always this trust issue about sharing data and transferring data, and really with advances in blockchain technology and being able to manage your own data, but actually give whoever needs a window into the full end-to-end supply chain, who needs it, without this whole data sharing issues or data sovereignty. It really opens up, and I think that's what we're trying to get to at the end of the day. It's all about helping patients or patient safety, and so being able to open that up without anybody being concerned about data issues, I think is key to it.
Right. So while we're still on the topic of technological advancements, one issue which is very close to my heart is with the improvements in drone technology, especially in the last 18 or so months. Drones are now capable of carrying an impressive and unprecedented payload. From retail to time-critical medical or supply part deliveries, drones can now deliver packages safely, efficiently, and on time. This could be ideal as the last mile transport for deliveries or deliveries in regions that are normally not easily accessible. Lenora, what are your thoughts on the emerging use of drones and drone technologies and unmanned vehicles, for instance, to aid the healthcare logistics industry?
Yeah, I think generally drones, I think will increasingly play a big part in logistics, like you rightly say, to deliver to places where it's hard to reach, right? And in fact, for DHL, when we first trialed out one of our drone technologies, the parcel copter, it was actually to send medical supplies to a remote German island, right? And what we're seeing is the increasing take-up rate. So like in China, in southern China, we actually have a drone service, right, to service, between our service center and a customer.
Right.
Yeah. So, but the thing about life sciences industry is I would be a little bit more cautious because we're talking about high value products that are consumed, right? We talked about security and counterfeiting and all that. So, and there's also, privacy issues and all that. So I would say that if you were to use drones, it's not impossible, but it would probably be a very targeted, selected approach, right? Maybe certain products, certain areas, and it would really have to be closely monitored, right? Because it's not just sending, the product safely, but there are concerns like the temperature control, right? So these are things that we need to take into consideration.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. David, what's your experience been in Hong Kong like? I mean, in Singapore, we saw last month where, a ship off the coast of Singapore was being quarantined, and there was a drone delivery of medicines from the mainland onto the ship for the crew there. I mean, do you have something similar in terms of stories and anecdotes to share in Hong Kong?
Unfortunately, no. Hong Kong is such a small and dense country. There's not really yet a business case to use drones for any kind of deliveries, in my opinion. We can get from one end of the place to the other in half an hour using a truck. We don't have traffic problems. So yeah, at this point, I think the use of drones for deliveries, I think the jury is still out on that one in Hong Kong. But as the panel was saying, for the more out of town, remote areas, then drone deliveries absolutely brilliant. They work very, very well. But for a dense population like Hong Kong, not yet.
All right. Okay. So then this brings us to the third segment of our discussion, where we will discuss some of the issues pertaining to globalization and regionalization. Now, prior to 2020, many supply chain efforts were focused on globalization, which allowed for better negotiation and economies of scale and encouraged low-cost manufacturing. Now, however, during a period of increasing trade barriers and in the midst of a global pandemic, regionalization is showing increased benefits and is a key priority for many supply chains. Companies cannot afford, financially or from a risk perspective, not to incorporate regionalization into their supply chain strategies. The concept of regionalizing your supply chain is not a new concept, but has recently become more prominent with the increased complexities of international trade. Many countries are now prioritizing in-country manufacturing to support their local economies. Last year, the trade war between China and the US intensified under President Trump. Tariffs on medical equipment and supplies resulted in increased costs for the healthcare industry. The question here is, what steps did your company or companies take to make your businesses offset any increased cost due to the increase in tariffs as a result of such trade wars? Chiong, let's start with you here.
Thank you. Right, thank you. My personal opinion is that there is no trade-off between globalization and regionalization, because in some aspects you can actually achieve both.
Right.
And there are some circumstances where you can only achieve either or. Maybe I take an example, right? Freight and warehousing. In Leica Biosystems, we have a globalization strategy. We sign contracts with the big players.
Right.
And we can lock in better pricings as a result of that.
Of course.
When you look about manufacturing, right, in Leica, we have many factories that spread across globally. We have manufacturing plants sitting out of Shanghai. We have plants sitting out of US in Vista. We have plants sitting out from Germany in Wetzlar, where our company was founded. This kind of strategy where we spread off is also a good strategy because it's not a knee-jerk reaction for us because we did not wait for a crisis to happen. And for us as supply chain practitioners, right, we are not short of crisis. Before that, you have trade wars, and then you have COVID.
Right.
What's next, right? We do not know. So as a company and as a supply chain practitioner, we are always prepared for that. My only advice is that also as brought up by Antonio, right? Pick your right partners, right? Good partners that you can work with, right? And also as Leonora pointed out, if you look at supply chain security risk, you will definitely want to work with providers with TAPA certifications, for instance, to ensure that your products and your transportation and your warehousing, the products are not tampered with, is taken care of. You want to work with also suppliers that can guarantee good supply to you. And we work with a lot of raw material suppliers that is closer to the factories, so that whatever happens in terms of the logistics and transportation, whether in sea or air, we are not too badly affected by it. And we are a medical device company. And to be very honest, we are right now in competition for space with vaccine manufacturers, with PPE manufacturers. We are getting bumped off from the flights because the governments of the world will say, let's bring the vaccine first because it's important for the health of the people, right?
Of course.
And we definitely want to work with partners that are strong. For the logistics, they have good block space agreements with carriers. And right now, definitely, it's a carriers market. The freight forwarders are also having challenges negotiating space to get their products into the planes.
Right.
And this will continue, at least in my personal opinion, the next few months, because the space for airs are all now catered for vaccines.
Correct.
And soon you will see that probably it will shift a little bit towards sea, because there are vaccine manufacturers like AstraZeneca. They do move their products via sea, and we know that there are active and passive solutions out there for cold chains.
Correct.
Right. And also as a supply chain person, I also want to advocate that a little tiny blip in any of the supply chain, be it for instance, I take an example, coal ice. Coal ice, you need ethanol, and we know that ethanol is short of supply in the market currently. Without ethanol, you cannot make dry ice. And you can see the supply chain is so intertwined in that way.
Correct.
So diversification is the key. Picking the right partners is the key. And when it comes to technology as well, we are using a lot of array of, we are using SAP in Leica. SAP definitely helps. Our funnel CRM systems is powered by SFDC, Salesforce.com. We talk about prioritization because there's just so much that we can cater out there.
Correct.
So we are using SFDC as well to also empower our sales and planning, our demand planning to be more robust so that we plan for the right equipment for our customers. So basically to me, the takeaway here is pick the right partner and work with the right partner. Right.
And very interestingly, you also briefly touched base on the point that we were discussing earlier on the interconnectivity between different industries. So, for instance, ethanol. Now, ethanol we know is a byproduct of molasses, which is from sugarcane. Now, if there is a sugarcane issue, then
everything is
So that's quite a challenge to sort of things which are beyond your control as supply chain provider.
And sometimes we never see it because there is some blips in the supply chain elsewhere, and the next you know it, it affects you, and that is the beauty of we supply chain practitioners. We learn every day. We sometimes get caught by gaps like this, and we learn from it.
Right. But also in terms of the fact that you mentioned that there is very limited air capacity, and obviously we know that sending through the sea route takes a lot more time. But we also see on a different side that airlines have been in the last year parking their aircraft in the desert and stuff. So has there been any discussions with airlines to say that okay, you bring back your aircraft and then change them into freighters and then we'll start off?
There is an effort actually because IATA published information to say that to transport that billions of doses globally for the next 2 years, it takes 8,000 loads of 100-ton aircraft of Boeing 747.
Wow.
In the world today, there is only 2,000 freighters on average.
Yes.
And you have jetliners about 26,000 globally.
Correct.
There are efforts to convert these aircraft to transport vaccines, and there is already this effort already going underway. There is now a mismatch in the demand and supply, right? You have freighters over demand, then you have the belly capacity going down because there is no passenger flight going. And you know that the passenger flights also have a limitation because IATA mandates that cold chain solutions, you use dry ice. And dry ice releases carbon dioxide. And then there is only a certain space inside the aircraft you can put all these stuff into it, the cold chain solution. So I think the carriers are also quite, they're quite apprehensive to convert many of their planes to become cargo planes, and then anticipating that if the demand comes back for passenger and then they cannot, they need to convert back again. I think this is a decision that probably the airlines will need to make in months and years to come. What is their long-term strategy when it comes to their air freight business?
Right. Okay. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has created global economic interdependency, especially in relation to the manufacture and dissemination of vaccinations. So the question here is, and David, this is directed to you, should emerging market economies form some sort of an alliance with respect to certain regions or jurisdictions to assist with their logistical challenges in the collective procurement and distribution of vaccines?
Yeah, it's a nice thought. It's easier said than done. I think certainly we don't want to reinvent the wheel all the time. So there's certain things that are obvious. A lot of our learnings that we've had just from the vaccine distribution here in Hong Kong, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So there's opportunities to share a lot of the learnings and a lot of the skill sets that we've built up with other regions and with other sister companies and affiliates, etc. Where it comes from the purchasing side and combining forces on the purchasing side, that's a little bit trickier because there's a certain lack of control that logistics companies have on that. So it's very much, especially in this time, when the huge demand for vaccines is there, governments are the guys who are actually forcing manufacturers to procure to them. All right. So there's limited leverage we can get from that. But certainly, SOPs, work instructions, mistakes, and remedies, we can all share that. That could be very helpful, and that can streamline the logistics process flow and get it right first time quickly. Right.
To add on, I believe there are alternatives out there, similar to what was brought up. There is COVAX, right? So it's an organization that is led by, I think WHO is one of the parties involved, and they're looking at how they can equitably distribute vaccines throughout the world. So I think there are already some initiatives along those lines.
Right. Well, thank you. So then this brings us to the last discussion point for today, which is how can healthcare supply chains move toward post-COVID resilience? Now, as discussed earlier, on the differences between the just-in-time and just-in-case, has the healthcare logistics industry, both on the distribution side as well as on the technological side, come up with any contingency scenarios which may be used as an industry template going forward? For instance, do you now have some sort of KPIs or targets for standardization? Daniel, do you want to kick off on this?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the problems or the issues that we find dealing with various healthcare providers or hospitals is that everybody runs their own system. They all have their own IT system, their own technology. And so being able to collaborate or being able to share data points has always been very difficult. I think with the introduction, and people are starting to adopt moving to FHIR as a kind of a base and standardizing all the kind of health records and and technology. This would be a starting point, and this will obviously help with what we're seeing there. I guess from our perspective as a kind of distributor, what we always want to do is work with our partners or work with our healthcare practitioners to really say how we can best benefit, and be that from being able to ensure that they have the correct stock, or be a collaborative where we join together and so we can help reduce costs. It's something that we're always working towards. It has been a bit of a struggle. I see with the learnings that we've taken from COVID, I hope we can really start to kind of accelerate some of these KPIs and standardizations. But I don't see it happening overnight. I think asking people to move away from systems that they've built in-house or they've been running for many years is a very difficult ask. So yeah, I see small baby steps coming. But, yeah, hopefully with post-COVID, we can accelerate this.
I think I'm going to agree 100% with Daniel here. I mean, the good news is there's learnings that can convert into a playbook, right?
Yep.
You know, for the companies who are going to take this. But this, I think I'm very fortunate to be able to speak to a lot of leaders in different areas, healthcare and pharmacy. But, you know, you got COVID-19, you got the Suez Canal, you got tariffs and trade wars. We haven't, you know, climate, you know, sustainability is going to have all these things. We're going to have. My message to the industry is variability, which is what we're talking about, that affects supply chain, is going to increase.
Right.
That's the bottom line. And if you're not doing these things that Daniel is talking about, you're late to the game. You have to start looking at these right now, because if we all agree variability is going to increase, then you need to be looking at these.
But then, can there be some sort of a collaboration or a cooperation between drug manufacturers, hospitals, and logistics suppliers that can ensure that, you know, the costs are reduced but the efficiency is increased? Or is there something that's already happening?
You just described digitalization, right?
Right.
So digitalization is two things. It's content and connectivity.
Right.
That's what it is, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I think every single one of those stakeholders you talked about wants collaboration. But the question is, what is the data? How are we going to collaborate? And if you don't have that connectivity, which goes back to what Daniel says, and you have that content, then the collaboration becomes much harder.
Right, right. Okay, I think, David, unless you have anything else to add on to this?
Well, yeah, I guess I totally agree with what the panel's saying there. The connectivity's got to be there. I think in terms of you know, the connectivity of the manufacturers through to the healthcare authorities, the hospitals, via the logistics people. There's one thing that we've forgotten there, which is the actual patient itself. Because essentially this connectivity is going to have to go right to the patient as well. And I believe, you know, everybody's got a mobile phone, or virtually everybody has. I think it's going to get there, probably sooner than we think. And I think the pandemic is going to speed all this connectivity up. There's going to be a lot more focus on home delivery of drugs, for example, which is going to come straight from manufacturers through the logistics, with the agreement from the hospitals and the doctors, from the health authorities, all the way to the patients. This is going to happen.
Right.
And we've got to be ready for this.
Oh, okay. Thanks. So we now open up the floor for questions from our audience. And I see that there is one question from the floor, and this was something that we had discussed. We briefly touched base earlier. The question is, what if there is a power outage and the freezers no longer work? So in terms of the storage of the vaccines and stuff, how does that play out at the ground level? I'm not too sure. Leonora, you want to take it?
I think in any logistics operation, you must have a contingency plan.
Right.
Yeah, and you know, this is a very typical contingency that we cater for. Basically, electrical outage. right? So usually in an operation there will be backup generators, right? That will be turned on for a period of time to make sure that the temperature control is still there until the power supply comes back and the equipment starts working again. But you need a robust BCP. Yeah.
Maybe I want to add on to that. Right, this is real because several weeks ago, I think there were several thousand of dosage get damaged in Japan because of a power outage. I think the thing here is not so much of having a genset at your place where you store it, right, a generator, but I think it's more of how the authorities of the world is going to govern and make sure that everybody that is in the supply chain today adheres to the gravity of this situation if something like this happen, right?
Correct.
And I think it takes a hand-in-hand approach between the governments and also the labs or whoever that is storing all these doses to work together to make sure that every doses actually goes to everybody without any wastage.
Right, right. David, anything to add on that front?
Oh, absolutely. There's the contingency plans for power outage are absolutely critical. And as Eleanor mentioned, we must have a robust contingency plan, backup generators, UPS backups, and then there's even if that doesn't work, you should have a third step plan, because this is cold chain drugs. Not only are they massively expensive and hard to get, they're also critical to save lives. So you would normally have even a third phase business continuity plan in this respect, such as bringing in reefer containers at very short notice, so you can flip them in as well, and you can put your product in there as well with another backup generator. I've worked in sites where we had 3 backup generators, one to back up each other. So if one failed, the next one kicked in. If that failed, the next one kicked in. So when it comes to cold chain, you cannot be too careful.
Right, right. All right, excellent. So then with that, we come to an end of a most insightful discussion. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your expertise within the industry and your personal experiences and anecdotes. It's been a pleasure moderating this session. Thank you to the audience for tuning in from various parts of the world. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow, the final day of the Asia Healthcare Week, where my colleague Conrad will be discussing healthcare facilities of the future. I'm sure that session will be as educational and insightful as today's session has been. And with that, we bid you goodbye. Thank you. Stay home and stay safe.